Girl slips Royal Guard a secret note. What he did next was shocking. The Royal Guard stood motionless, his ceremonial uniform pristine under the bright London sky. Crowds gathered outside the palace, phones raised, capturing photos of the famed changing of the guard. Tourists chattered in various languages, pointing and marveling at the stoic figures standing watch. For Guard Ethan Blake, the day felt like any other, predictable, routine, and uneventful. Until he saw her. She was petite, barely noticeable among the throng of onlookers. Her face was pale, her eyes darting anxiously as though expecting danger to leap from the shadows. She weaved through the crowd with urgency, clutching something tightly in her hand. Ethan's training kept him still, but his instincts flared. Something wasn't right. The girl moved closer, slipping past the group of tourists. Her movements were jittery. Finally, she was close enough to touch him. She reached out, trembling, and slid a folded note into his gloved hand before retreating as quickly as she had approached. Ethan's heart thudded. A breach of protocol like this was rare, and his mind raced with questions. Was she in trouble? Was this some prank? With a controlled motion, he tucked the note into the pocket hidden in his uniform, maintaining his rigid posture. Moments later, the girl disappeared into the crowd. An hour passed before Ethan had the chance to discreetly read the note. Alone in the guards' quarters, he carefully unfolded the paper, his fingers brushing against the frantic scrawl of handwriting. The words were rushed, uneven, as though written under duress. "Help me. I've escaped, but they're still after me. They'll find me if I stay. Please, I need your help. Don't trust anyone. They're watching." No name. No details. Just fear etched in ink. Ethan's instincts kicked in. His mind replayed the girl's face, her desperate eyes, her shaky hands. This wasn't a prank. Someone was in real danger, and she had chosen him, a royal guard sworn to protect and serve, to help her. But how? He wasn't a police officer. His duty was to the palace, to the crown. Yet something about the note gripped him, refusing to let go. As the hours ticked by, he couldn't shake the unease. That girl was out there, hiding from someone, or something. If he did nothing, would she end up hurt? Or worse? Ethan's chance to act came later that evening during his break. Changing into civilian clothes, he slipped out of the barracks unnoticed. The note offered no clues to her whereabouts, but he started where he'd last seen her, near the palace gates. The area was quieter now, the tourists dispersed. Ethan scanned the streets, his eyes searching for any sign of her. A nearby cafe caught his attention. Its windows were fogged from the warmth inside, and the dim light gave it a sense of quiet refuge. Something tugged at him to check there. As he stepped inside, the faint jingle of a bell announced his arrival. A few patrons sat scattered around, nursing cups of coffee. And there she was, huddled in a corner booth, her head bowed, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her hair, slightly disheveled, fell over her face like a curtain. Ethan approached cautiously, his heart pounding. He slid into the seat across from her, keeping his voice low. "It's me. The guard. I got your note." Her head snapped up, eyes wide with recognition. Relief and fear battled for dominance in her expression. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's not safe." Ethan leaned in. "You asked for help. I'm here to help. Tell me what's going on." Her hands gripped the mug tighter, knuckles white. She hesitated, her eyes darting to the window. "They're out there. Watching. They'll see you with me." "Who's watching?" Ethan pressed. "You need to trust me. I can't help if I don't know what's happening." She glanced around nervously, then leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I was taken. Weeks ago. They kept me in a basement, tied, blindfolded. I don't even know where it was. I escaped 2 nights ago, but they're looking for me. They're everywhere." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Kidnapping? Weeks in captivity? It was a nightmare come to life. "Why you?" he asked. "Why did they take you?" Before Ethan could ask more, The bell above the cafe door jingled. The girl stiffened, her eyes locking on the entrance. Two men in dark coats stepped inside, their gazes scanning the room like wolves hunting prey. Her breathing quickened. "It's them," she whispered, panic creeping into her voice. "They found me." Ethan glanced at the men, his pulse racing. They didn't seem to notice him yet, but it was only a matter of time. He turned back to the girl. "Do you trust me?" he asked urgently. Her eyes met his, wide with fear but glinting with a sliver of hope. She nodded. "Then follow my lead." Ethan stood, pulling her gently but firmly to her feet. The men's eyes followed their movement, suspicion flickering across their faces. Without hesitation, Ethan led her toward the cafe's back door. He kept his body between her and the men, shielding her as they moved. The door led to a narrow alleyway, dimly lit and lined with dumpsters. The cold air bit at their skin as they hurried through the maze of side streets. Ethan's military training kicked in, his mind calculating escape routes and potential threats. Behind them, footsteps echoed. The men were following. "Keep moving," Ethan whispered, his grip on her arm firm but reassuring. She stumbled, her exhaustion evident, but he didn't let her falter. The alley opened onto a main road, bustling with evening traffic. Ethan led her into the crowd, weaving through pedestrians. He glanced back. The men had entered the alley but hesitated, scanning the throng of people. Ethan guided her into a small convenience store, crouching behind a display of snacks. The girl's breathing was ragged, her hands trembling. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe. For now." She looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Ethan gave her a small nod, his resolve hardening. This was only the beginning. Whoever was after her wasn't going to stop. But neither was he. Ethan kept his hand firm on Maya's shoulder, his mind racing. The store's flickering lights cast shaky shadows, mirroring the tension between them. Maya's breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. "Maya," Ethan said softly, his voice steady despite the storm building inside him. "You're safe for now, but I need to know what's going on." Her wide eyes darted toward the door. "You don't understand. They won't stop. I shouldn't have come to you, now you're in danger too." Ethan crouched in front of her. "You trusted me enough to ask for help. I'm not walking away now. Tell me, who are they?" Maya swallowed, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter like it might hold her steady. "I heard something I shouldn't have." "What did you hear?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They were making plans, something about deliveries and fake identities. I think it's smuggling, but not just money or jewelry. Something bigger. They saw me, Ethan. They knew I heard." His muscles tensed. Fake identities? This was no ordinary crime. And now Maya was tangled in it. "Did you recognize any of them?" She nodded. "One of them. He has a tattoo. A snake wrapped around a dagger on his wrist." Ethan froze. The image stirred something deep in his memory, whispers during security briefings, warnings about a criminal network that operated under the radar, slipping through borders with fake passports and hidden cargo. The Black Fang. "You're sure?" Ethan asked, his voice sharp. "Yes. I saw it up close before I ran." His jaw clenched. If Black Fang was involved, this wasn't just smuggling, it was organized, dangerous, and deeply rooted. Maya wasn't safe, and neither was he. Ethan glanced at the store's back exit. "We can't stay here." Maya hesitated, but his firm tone pushed her into motion. They slipped through the back alley, stepping into the cold night. Ethan kept her close, his eyes scanning every shadow. "Where are we going?" Maya whispered. "I know someone who can help." They stopped outside a worn-down building tucked away from the main roads. Ethan pressed the buzzer. "Who is it?" a groggy voice answered. "Ethan. Open the door." The door creaked open, revealing Simon, an old friend with sharp eyes and a past that mirrored Ethan's own. "What are you doing here?" Simon asked, his eyes narrowing when he spotted Maya. "We need a place to lay low. Just for tonight." Simon hesitated but eventually stepped aside. "You're lucky I owe you." Inside, Maya sank into the couch, visibly trembling. Simon leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Now explain." Ethan kept his voice low and explained everything. Simon's expression darkened. "You realize who you're dealing with, right? The snake tattoo, Black Fawn. These people don't back off." Maya's hands tightened into fists. "Then what do we do?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "We don't let them win." Suddenly, a knock echoed through the apartment. Maya flinched, her eyes darting toward the door. "Stay down," Ethan ordered, stepping forward. Simon pulled out a baseball bat from behind the couch, giving Ethan a look that said he was ready if things went south. Ethan approached the door carefully. The knock came again, louder this time. When he opened it, his stomach dropped. A man in a police uniform stood there, but something felt wrong. His stance was too rigid, too rehearsed. And then Ethan saw it, the faint outline of a snake tattoo peeking out from under his sleeve. Ethan didn't move. "Good evening, officer," he said carefully. The man's eyes swept the room behind him. "We're looking for someone. Young woman, dark hair. Have you seen her?" Ethan forced his expression to remain neutral. "Haven't seen anyone. Just visiting a friend." The officer's gaze lingered, his lips twitching in what almost looked like amusement. "If you do, let us know." He handed Ethan a card, but his eyes locked with Ethan's as though daring him to slip up. Then he turned and walked away. Ethan shut the door, exhaling slowly. Maya was staring at him, panic written all over her face. "It's them, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yeah. What do we do now?" Ethan glanced at Simon. "We fight back. But first, we need to find out what they're really after." Simon peeked through the blinds, his voice sharp. "They already know we're here, Ethan. We don't have time to sit around." Ethan turned to Maya, crouching down so their eyes met. "You need to tell me everything, no more holding back. If I'm going to protect you, I need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Maya hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "I told you most of it." "Not enough," Ethan pressed. "Start from the beginning." She took a shaky breath. "I was helping a friend. She worked for a shipping company, handling records for deliveries coming through the docks. She found out something wasn't adding up. Crates listed as empty were being moved around constantly. But they were always sealed." "Sealed?" Ethan repeated, his brow furrowing. "Yes. And the weight was wrong. Too heavy to be empty. She thought it was theft, maybe something valuable being smuggled out of the country. She told me about it and Maya's voice cracked. "I told her to report it, but she was scared. She asked me to look into it instead." Ethan leaned closer. "What did you find?" Maya's eyes darted towards Simon, then back to Ethan. "I went to the docks after hours to check the shipments myself. I didn't think anyone would be there." She swallowed hard. "I saw men unloading the crates, but they weren't taking inventory. They were swapping the labels, changing the numbers so no one could track what was inside. I didn't know what it was, but it looked expensive, electronics, jewelry, maybe even art. They saw me before I could leave." Simon muttered under his breath. "Black Fawn. They're running high-end smuggling operations, hiding stolen goods under legitimate shipments." Maya nodded. "I ran, but they caught me outside the warehouse. They took my phone and locked me in a storage room. They kept asking what I saw, who I'd told, but I didn't say anything." Ethan's jaw tightened. "How did you escape?" "One of them left the door unlocked while he was distracted. I waited until it was clear and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the palace." Her voice broke, and she wiped at her eyes. "I thought if I could just get to someone in uniform, someone I could trust, they wouldn't be able to touch me." Ethan felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the men who'd done this. She trusted him to protect her, and he wasn't going to let her down. Simon broke the tense silence. "We need evidence. Ethan pulled out his phone. I'll go to the docks and get what we need, photos, shipment logs, anything that ties them to this. Maya's eyes widened. No! You can't go back there. It's too dangerous. Ethan knelt beside her, his voice calm but firm. We can't stop them unless we have proof. I'll be careful, but this is the only way. Simon handed Ethan a small flashlight and a folding knife. Take these. Just in case. Ethan slipped them into his jacket. Keep her safe until I'm back. Maya grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. Promise me you'll come back. He met her eyes. I promise. The dockyard loomed ahead, dark and quiet except for the faint hum of machinery. Ethan moved carefully, sticking to the shadows. He found the warehouse Maya had described, its windows glowing faintly. Inside, the sound of voices drifted through the air. Ethan crept closer, peeking through a gap in the crates. 4 men were gathered around a table, sorting through documents and boxes. One of them had the snake tattoo. Ethan raised his phone and snapped pictures. Shipment logs, cargo labels, and even marked delivery routes, all evidence of illegal activity. Then a crate shifted behind him. The noise made his blood run cold. Who's there? A voice barked. Ethan ducked behind a stack of boxes, his pulse hammering. Footsteps approached fast, and he knew hiding wouldn't last long. He bolted toward the exit, hearing shouts behind him. Get him! He sprinted down the dock, weaving between crates. Flashlights danced behind him, cutting through the fog. He reached the edge of the pier, his options narrowing. A splash to his right caught his attention, a small boat tied to the dock. Without hesitation, Ethan climbed aboard and cut the ropes, pushing off into the water. The men stopped at the edge of the dock, shouting in frustration as the boat drifted into the shadows. By the time Ethan returned to the apartment, he was drenched and shivering. Simon let him in quickly, locking the door behind him. Maya jumped up from the couch. You're back! Ethan handed Simon the phone. I got the evidence. Simon flipped through the photos, his eyes narrowing. This is solid. We take this to the guards first thing in the morning. Maya's relief was short-lived. But what if they come after us before then? Ethan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We're not alone in this. The guards will back us up. Her voice shook. What if it's not enough? Ethan's expression hardened. Then we'll make it enough. But even as he said it, the weight of the danger they still faced settled in his chest. Black Fawn wasn't going to let this go easily. And Ethan knew the night was far from over. Ethan stood by the window, his eyes scanning the street below. It was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that felt heavier than noise. The glow of streetlights flickered against the pavement, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. Simon sat at the table, his phone in hand, scrolling through the evidence Ethan had gathered. Maya sat curled up in the corner of the couch, her knees drawn to her chest. Her hands fidgeted with the edge of the blanket, but her gaze was fixed on Ethan. Do you think they followed you back? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned away from the window and faced her. Not yet, he said, but his tone betrayed his doubt. We're running out of time. We need to move. Simon set his phone down with a heavy thud. I sent the photos to one of my contacts, a former guard who still works security at the palace. He'll make sure the right people see it, but we're on our own until they act. Maya's voice wavered. What if they don't act fast enough? They will, Ethan said firmly. The guards protect their own, and that includes anyone under their care. Maya's shoulders sagged slightly, but the fear never left her eyes. The knock on the door sent all 3 of them into motion. Simon grabbed the baseball bat from behind the couch. Ethan reached for the knife he tucked into his jacket, motioning for Maya to stay down. The knock came again, louder this time. Who is it? Simon called out. Royal Guard. The voice on the other side was sharp and authoritative. We're here to help. Ethan hesitated, exchanging a look with Simon. They couldn't afford to trust blindly, not with what they were dealing with. "Show your ID," Ethan called. There was a pause before a laminated badge slipped under the door. Ethan bent to inspect it. The name matched the contact Simon had mentioned, Sergeant Harris. He recognized the face. Ethan exhaled. "It's legit." Simon unbolted the door, and 2 uniformed guards stepped inside, their sharp eyes scanning the room. The taller of the 2, Harris, immediately focused on Ethan. "You Blake?" Ethan nodded. "We've seen your evidence." Harris's voice was calm but urgent. "We're moving on the docks, but we need you 3 out of here now. These people aren't amateurs. They won't stop until they tie up loose ends." Maya stiffened. "You mean us?" Harris didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes. But we'll get you somewhere safe." The guards moved quickly, escorting them out through the back alley and into an unmarked car parked down the street. Ethan sat beside Maya in the back seat, his eyes scanning every car and alley they passed. Maya broke the silence. "What happens now?" Harris glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "We'll take you to a secure location and keep you there until this is over." "And what about them?" Maya's voice cracked. "They'll be dealt with," Harris said simply. "You don't need to worry about that." Ethan noticed Maya clutching the edge of her seat, her knuckles turning white. He reached over and gave her hand a light squeeze. "You're safe now." But the sense of safety shattered when the car jerked suddenly. Tires screeched as the driver swerved, narrowly missing a van that cut them off. "Hold on!" Harris barked. Ethan grabbed Maya and braced as the car skidded to a stop. The van's doors burst open, and masked men poured out, their eyes locked on the car. "Get out!" Harris shouted, already reaching for his radio. Simon threw open the door and pulled Maya out, shielding her with his body as Ethan followed. The guards stepped between them and the attackers, drawing their weapons. "Go!" Harris barked at Ethan. "We'll cover you." Ethan didn't hesitate. He grabbed Maya's hand and bolted toward the nearest alley, Simon close behind. Footsteps thundered after them, but the guards' voices and sharp orders echoed in the background, buying them time. The alley twisted and turned, and Ethan's grip on Maya never loosened. She stumbled, but he pulled her forward, refusing to slow down. They burst out onto a quiet side street and ducked behind a row of parked cars. Simon leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "We can't keep running like this." Ethan scanned the area. "We won't have to." He pointed to a hotel down the street. "We'll hide there until Harris calls." Maya's voice shook. "What if they find us again?" "They won't." Ethan's voice was steady, but the fire in his eyes told a different story. "Because I won't let them." Inside the hotel room, Ethan locked the door and secured the windows. Simon paced near the entrance, his phone in hand, waiting for an update. Maya sat on the bed, her legs pulled up to her chest. "I don't know how much more of this I can take." Ethan sat beside her. "You've made it this far, Maya. You're stronger than you think." Her voice broke. "What if this never ends?" "It will." He looked at her, his voice gentler this time. "You're not alone in this. We're going to end it. Together." The phone buzzed, breaking the tension. Simon answered. "Yeah?" He listened for a moment before exhaling and turning to them. "The guards raided the docks. They've got people in custody." Maya's breath caught. "Does that mean it's over?" Simon's expression darkened. "Not yet. They're still looking for the leader." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then we stay ready." Simon sat near the door, his hand resting on a heavy flashlight he picked up earlier. His phone was placed on the table, its screen dark. "No updates yet." Maya sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching a pillow as if it might shield her from the fear clawing at her. "What if they didn't get all of them?" Her voice was small, fragile. Ethan stopped pacing and knelt in front of her. "They didn't," he admitted. "But they got enough to weaken them. Black Fang isn't as invincible as they think they are." Maya shook her head. "You don't know that. Their leader is still out there. And he's running out of options." Ethan's voice was calm, steady, the same tone that had kept her grounded since the moment she'd slipped him that note. He's desperate now, and that makes him reckless. But it also makes him easier to catch. Before she could respond, Simon's phone buzzed, making everyone jump. He grabbed it and put it on speaker. "Harris? We've got a problem." The guard's voice was tight. "One of the men we arrested talked, but not before tipping off their leader. He slipped away before we could move in." Maya's breath caught. "He's coming for me, isn't he?" Harris's voice softened. "We think so. But we're tracking him, and we have officers in the area. Stay where you are. We'll get to you before he does." Simon hung up and turned to Ethan. "I don't like this. We're sitting." Simon sat near the door, his hand resting on a heavy flashlight he'd picked up earlier. His phone was placed on the table, its screen dark. "No updates yet." Maya sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching a pillow as if it might shield her from the fear clawing at her. "What if they didn't get all of them?" Her voice was small, fragile. Ethan stopped pacing and knelt in front of her. "They didn't," he admitted. "But they got enough to weaken them. Black Fang isn't as invincible as they think they are." Maya shook her head. "You don't know that. Their leader is still out there. And he's running out of options." Ethan's voice was calm, steady, the same tone that had kept her grounded since the moment she'd slipped him that note. "He's desperate now, and that makes him reckless. But it also makes him easier to catch." Before she could respond, Simon's phone buzzed, making everyone jump. He grabbed it and put it on speaker. "Harris? We've got a problem." The guard's voice was tight. "One of the men we arrested talked, but not before tipping off their leader. He slipped away before we could move in." Maya's breath caught. "He's coming for me, isn't he?" Harris's voice softened. "We think so. But we're tracking him, and we have officers in the area. Stay where you are. We'll get to you before he does." Simon hung up and turned to Ethan. "I don't like this. We're sitting ducks." Ethan checked his watch. "We're not waiting." They moved quickly. Simon grabbed the keys to a rental car he parked around the corner. Ethan double-checked the locks and slipped his knife back into his jacket. Maya hesitated by the door. "What if it's a mistake? What if we run right into him?" Ethan looked her in the eyes. "Then we stop running." The drive was tense, the silence broken only by Maya's sharp breaths and the occasional hum of Simon's phone as updates came through. Ethan sat in the back seat with her, his eyes fixed on the road behind them, searching for headlights that lingered too long. "There," Simon said, pointing to a small building tucked away on the edge of the city. "That's the safe house Harris mentioned." The moment they stepped inside, Ethan felt the weight of the tension ease, just slightly. The room was bare but secure, reinforced with thick walls and no windows on the ground floor. Maya sank into a chair, her shoulders slumping. "We made it." Simon locked the door. "For now." But the relief was short-lived. A faint creak outside made Ethan's heart run cold. Another sound, this time closer. Footsteps. "Stay down," Ethan whispered, pushing Maya toward the corner. "Simon, with me." They pressed themselves against the wall near the door, listening. The footsteps stopped, and the handle jiggled. Ethan's grip tightened on the knife. "It's him," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. The handle rattled again, followed by a sharp knock. "Open the door." The voice was deep, rough, and familiar. "I know you're in there." Simon shot Ethan a look. "What's the plan?" Ethan's mind raced. They couldn't hold the door forever, and the police were still minutes away. He glanced around the room, spotting an overturned table. "We lure him in." Simon raised an eyebrow. "What?" "We let him think we're scared and unprepared. Then we end it." Simon hesitated but nodded. Ethan unbolted the door but left it chained. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. "Open up, and maybe I'll let you all walk out of this." Ethan glanced at Simon and nodded. In one swift motion, he yanked the chain free and stepped back, The sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden glow through the curtains of the safe house. The long, suffocating night had passed, but the weight of everything that had happened still lingered in the air. Maya sat by the small table, sipping a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug absent-mindedly as her thoughts raced. Across the room, Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his sharp eyes fixed on the door as though expecting trouble to burst through at any moment. But there was no trouble. Not anymore. Simon returned from a brief phone call, shutting the door softly behind him. Harris just confirmed it. Ethan straightened. Confirmed what? The raid. They've seized the docks, the shipments, and arrested the remaining members of Black Fawn who tried to slip away. Simon's lips twitched into a rare smile. Their entire operation is done. Maya let out a shaky breath and leaned back in her chair, her shoulders finally relaxing for the first time in days. So it's really over? Simon nodded. It's over. Ethan pulled out his phone and scrolled through the images he had taken, the crates, the documents, the faces of the men who had caused so much fear and chaos. The evidence had done its job. The royal guards had stepped in, and the criminals were now in custody, facing charges that would ensure they never saw the light of day again. But as he put the phone away, Ethan's eyes drifted to Maya. She still looked fragile, as though the weight of what she had endured hadn't fully lifted. He sat down across from her. You're safe now, he said gently. Maya gave him a weak smile. I don't feel safe yet. You will. She looked up at him, her voice quieter now. I don't know how I'm supposed to go back to normal after this. Ethan didn't hesitate. You don't go back. You move forward. You survived something most people couldn't even imagine. That's not weakness, that's strength. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time, they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release, of letting go. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan reached across the table, his hand covering hers. You're stronger than you know, Maya. Don't ever forget that. Later that afternoon, Harris arrived at the safe house, this time in uniform and without the tension that had accompanied his earlier visits. The area's clear, he said. You can leave whenever you're ready. Maya hesitated. And what happens to me now? You're free to go back to your life, Harris said. And if you need anything at all, you know who to call. Ethan walked her outside, the sunlight warming the chill that had settled over the past 2 days. Maya looked around, her eyes adjusting to the world she thought she'd never get to see again. She turned to Ethan. What about you? He smiled faintly. I'll go back to my post. Maya blinked. Just like that? Just like that. He shrugged. Being a guard isn't just about standing still. It's about protecting people, no matter the cost. She took a step closer, her voice softer. You saved my life, Ethan. Twice. You saved yourself? Maya shook her head. No, I didn't. You believed in me when I couldn't. Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he handed her a small card with a phone number written on the back. In case you ever need help again, he said. She took it, smiling for the first time. I hope I won't. Me too. As Maya walked away, her shoulders straighter and her steps steadier, Ethan felt a rare sense of peace. The case was closed. The danger was gone. And Maya had a chance to rebuild her life. Simon stepped up beside him. You did good, you know. Ethan smirked. Don't get soft on me now. Later that evening, Ethan stood outside Palace once again, dressed in full uniform. The crowd was thick, the cameras flashing, the tourists staring in awe. To them, he was just another guard standing motionless, a symbol of order and tradition. But beneath the stillness, Ethan felt different. He wasn't just standing there anymore. He was watching, protecting, ready for whatever came next. And this time, he knew without a doubt that he could handle it.